Hello, I'd like to analyze a game between Vladimir Kramnik and Magnus-Carlsen back in 2007 at the Dortmund Sparkassen chess meeting, which is an invitation-only tournament with a lot of the best players at the time. Kramnik went on to win this tournament. Anyways, mostly I want to cover it because it features the Catalan, which is my go-to opening for white. I think more people should play it because I see a lot of people playing the London, and the London's fine, I guess, but I think the Catalan is just a superior version, a superior opening to the London because it has more concrete ideas, in my opinion. But anyways, so let's take a look at this game. So we start out with knight f3. Yeah, so these are all normal developing moves. And so this pretty much categorizes the Catalan. You have this very compact setup on the king side, c4 and d4. And the main idea is that it's very easy development, and king safety is pretty good since you have this structure. It fights for the center. And there's always this long-term nagging pressure on black's queen side due to this light-squared bishop already developed on this diagonal. Okay, so both players castle, and black takes on c4, which denotes the open Catalan. If black chooses to stay solid with moves such as, say, c6, then this would be the closed Catalan. Anyways, open Catalan. So in this position, there are pretty much three main ways to win back the pawn. Knight e5, queen a4, and queen c2. In this game, Kramnik chooses to play queen c2. A common reply that also works here is a4. Pretty much if black wants to hold on to this pawn, black is going to seriously weaken the queen side. Generally, black should just give up this pawn in exchange for more development. So Kramnik takes, and the queen gets pushed back, and black is able to develop their own bishop on the light-squared diagonal to try and counteract white's light-squared bishop. Now in this position, there are, 10 different moves you can play. Yeah, this is a very deep position with many viable moves. Some key ideas is that the black pawn on c7 is backwards, and black would love to trade this off for white's d4 pawn. Okay, so the game continues with bishop d2. So to me, at first, I thought this was a really strange move because it kind of gets in the way of white's own pieces, since there are three different pieces who would like to make use of this square. And the bishop is not even very active here. What I was thinking was perhaps bishop f4, which feels a little bit more natural. And again, the computer says this is the best move, but it really doesn't matter. They're both pretty much the same. But after analyzing this a little bit more, I've come to realize that bishop f4 comes with its own drawbacks. So black would most likely reply with knight c6, hitting the d4 pawn twice. So if white plays e3 to defend d4, then this dark square bishop will be hunted down with knight d5, and the pawn structure will be compromised. It's a matter of preference of whether or not you want to break up your pawn structure like this. And by the way, bishop e5 runs into getting the bishop trapped. So if e3 runs into losing the dark squared bishop and messing up your own pawn structure, then the best move is knight c3. Knight c3 defends d4 through tactics. If black wants to test this, they'll quickly run into a bunch of exchanges, and note that the knight on c3 prevents the light squared bishop from using the e4 square with tempo, since it would hit the queen. What's best is for black to back up to h3, and can you spot the winning idea for white here? Okay, it's knight takes e6. And now black is forced to pretty much give up the queen for the knight and the rook. So white would be up the exchange, sort of, playing queen versus rook and bishop. The computer says this is plus 1.6, but I mean, come on. Most people would not prefer to play this as black. It's pretty much only white here that can play for the advantage. So this is why knight c3 defends d4 via tactic. After knight c3, there is the very thematic idea of knight b4 by black, which clears the way for c5. And once c5 hits, some exchanges happen, and black pretty much equalizes. The pawn structure is similar on both sides. Very difficult to play for a win. Okay, so bearing this in mind, this might be why Kramnik didn't choose to play bishop f4, but rather bishop d2. Because, as it follows in the game, knight c6, e3, knight b4, the bishop is ready to knock out the knight the moment it lands on b4. Again, same idea. Black is paving the way for the c5 advance. Note that the white queen cannot stay on the c-file to prevent this c5 move from hitting. If white insists with queen c1, then white can quickly find himself in a very uncomfortable position. You don't want to play this. The computer now says it's -1 for black. Okay, so back to knight b4. This is why white should just take. Once white has traded off their dark squared bishop, white has now put every single one of their pawns on a dark square, which now counteracts black's dark square bishop. Okay, a few more moves. Black backs up, white develops, and notice this nice grip on c5. Now black is stuck with this backwards c pawn. Black counterattacks by trying to chip away at white's control of c5. And note the nice coordination between 3 of white's pieces on the c6 square. A hole deep in the black position, since there are no pawns that can control this square. So what's the best move for black here? Okay, it's bishop takes g2. Black should trade off the light squared bishops, and if according to best play, white would be able to jump into the c6 hole, force the black queen to move, and this is just what the engine suggests. Yeah, and the variation ends here. Pretty much, white is able to maintain a knight on c6. No black piece is able to contest this square, except for the queen and I guess the rooks, but it's going to take a while for black to be able to converge on c6 and kick this knight out. Since the knight has lodged itself into c6, it disconnects the 2 black queenside pawns, and they're both very weak now, especially the b5 pawn. Okay, but this is roughly equal. The computer says this is equal. Anyways, let's go back. So Carlsen perhaps saw this and didn't like the fact that a knight would land on c6. So Carlsen played knight d5, which blocks the light squared bishop's vision of the c6 square. However, this runs into some issues. Knight b3, hitting the pawn. Black is forced to capture. And white, instead of recapturing, can play knight a5. And now you realize that white is going to put a knight on c6, and there's nothing black can do about it. Look how nearly all of white's pieces are converging on that square. Okay? The bishop needs to back up since it was being hit. Knight a to c6. And what's the best move for black? Okay, there's pretty much three options. So maybe first, the queen is being hit. So let's consider queen d6. This is not good because it runs into bishop takes d5. And the queen cannot recapture because then that would run into a fork. The bishop would be left undefended and black would lose the queen because it's a fork. So he's forced to recapture with the pawn. And white is able to take back. This is just what the engine suggests. Black attempts to kick out the knight. White trades and returns. And now look at the pawn structure. These three pawns are all extremely weak, and this bishop is locked behind these two pawns. Okay, so this is not good. This is plus 2.5 for white. Okay. So queen d6 doesn't work, so let's try queen e8. This runs into pretty much the exact same plan of taking on d5, trading, and white can give up the b4 pawn in exchange for queenside development, putting rooks on active files, and now black is stuck with these three weaknesses. Again, this bishop is stuck in the corner with no good squares it can go to, and these two pawns are disconnected. Computer is saying this is plus 1.9 for white. Okay, so neither queen moves work. So the best case for black is to take on c6. And now white's light squared bishop now has no direct challenger. Anyways, black sidesteps the attack on the queen. And maybe a surprising move to some people, white plays bishop takes d5 anyways. And it's for pretty much the same reason as we've seen in the variations involving the queen move. Because note that queen cannot take because it runs into the same fork. So pawn takes, and this is most likely what why Carlsen chose to take is because now there's only one weakness on c7. We no longer have to deal with a bad light squared bishop stuck in the corner. So yes, this is the best variation for black, but this is still plus 2 for white. Okay, white recaptures, black activates the rook, and with rook a5, it turns out that black's clumsy and cramped position results in the loss of this pawn. There's no way for black to defend this pawn. So the bishop backs up to avoid being taken by the knight. Knight attacks the queen, and white wins the pawn. Now we have an exchange of rooks, and queen takes c7, hitting the rook. So you might be wondering, well, what about this pawn? So what about rook takes b4? Wins back the pawn. Try and figure out what the best move for white is. Okay. Quiet move. Rook a1. And it turns out that when the black rook left the defense of the eighth rank, black can now no longer prevent white from infiltrating on the last two ranks. So one best try is to at least try and hold the 8th rank. Now, but white can just come in on the 7th, and now white is converging on f7. F7 is forced to get out of the way, and a few moves follow, forcing a trade of queens. And now we get to this endgame. Computer is saying this is plus 4.9, pretty much because this pawn is on a light square, and so then therefore cannot be defended by this dark squared bishop, while this knight can attack both the light and dark squares depending on where it's placed. So this pawn will be lost, and then it's just a 2-pawn advantage, and all the pawns are on the same side. So the bishop will not have a mobility advantage over the knight. Okay. So this is why, if we go back, rook takes b4 is off limits. Black plays bishop d6 to counterattack and defend the rook. Queen drops back, and what's the best move for black? Okay, so if black takes e5 to try and win a pawn, the issue is that d5 cannot be defended, since the queen holds all the squares where the rook might be able to come to. d5 cannot be defended and will eventually be lost. Note that taking this pawn is off limits because of back rank issues. And black can try and go for a perpetual, but eventually white is able to escape all the checks, and now is just up 2 clean pawns in an endgame. Black has no direct counterplay. This is clearly winning. Computer says this is plus 5.6. Okay. So let's go back to queen a5. Okay, so we know that bishop takes knight doesn't work. How about rook takes b4? And can you spot the winning idea for white? Okay. So first white delivers a check on the back rank, forces the bishop back, and now same idea as before. Rook c1, and the white rook is coming and getting active on one of the back ranks, and there's no way for black to defend both the 7th and 8th rank at the same time. What the engine suggests is pretty much a mass liquidation, and now in this position, black is lost once again because this pawn cannot be defended, and it's pretty much a 2-pawn advantage in an endgame. Okay, computer gives this plus 7. So let's go back to queen. Let's go back to queen a5. Okay. So bishop takes e5 doesn't work. Rook takes b4 won't work. So what's tried in the game is bishop takes b4. And this does not work because white can just pin the bishop to the rook and back rank. If bishop takes, then black gets mated on the back rank. Black attempts to guard against this by protecting the rook, but white just sidesteps it, and white's next threat is to bring the knight in to c6, where it will fork these 2 pieces, and black is going to lose material. Here, black resigns. Now, if we try and play out a few more moves, so to try and get out of the fork, if black moves the bishop, pretty much the issue is that black is just too far behind in material. Trading only runs into more issues. Black is forced into a really passive position to defend the f7 pawn, and white again ends up with 2 extra pawns in an endgame, clearly winning, plus 6.5. Okay. So now you might be wondering, what is the best move in this position? And the computer suggests h5. I don't quite understand this move myself, but pretty much all you need to know is that the knight can just drop back to defend b4. So the b4 pawn cannot be won, and now white is just going to grind down black in this endgame. It's plus 2.4, but white is the only one with an advantage. They're just going to slowly end up pushing this pawn to the end. And black does not have any serious active counterplay to get at the white king. Let's see what the engine suggests. So yeah, so if the engine is just trying to play h5, h4 to try and chip away at the black king, at the black king side structure, I'm not going to question what the computer thinks too much. Okay. Yeah. And the key move, knight e1, which holds the light squares near the white king, and now black has no way of getting at the white king, since this is a dark squared bishop. And now white is just going to slowly grind down black and push this pawn all the way to the end. Okay, but that didn't happen. Let's go back to... Right, okay. Yeah, so black blunders and takes on b4 and resigns here. Computer gives this plus 4.2. Okay, so let's go back. Let's see, what are the key lessons that we can take away from this opening, or take away from this game? First off, the Catalan is a good mid-range opening with long-term pressure on black's queenside. It can be difficult for black to develop the queenside because of this light squared bishop's placement on the long diagonal. Okay. Yeah, best is for black to just give up this pawn. Trying to hold on results in serious weakening of the queenside. And when trading off your dark squared bishop, putting all your pawns on dark squares is a good way to counteract your opponent's remaining dark squared bishop. And if we go forward a few more moves to here, controlling the squares in front of a backwards pawn and preventing its forward progress helps you to isolate weakness so you can put pressure on it later. And a few more moves. And stay flexible with your plans. Even though you have this great light squared bishop, the best move here is to trade it off for the knight in the center, because it eliminates black's most active piece and it creates more weaknesses for you to target in the future. Okay, well, I'm just going to play through the rest of the game. And black blunders, black resigns, because they cannot prevent a bunch of material from being traded off. And yeah, again, even with best play, once the material comes off the board, then black is without counterplay. And this is a completely winning endgame. Okay, so I hope you learned a thing or two. I hope you'll consider giving the Catalan a try. I think it's a absolutely fantastic opening. Extremely solid, played at the top levels by many great players. And yeah, okay, catch you next time.